I'm excited for you guys to listen to this episode of the Elite Recruiter podcast. It is going to be a deep episode talking about some very tough things. But before we get started on that, a few quick things. First of all, the Elite Recruiter Book Club. Book of the month for January was Atomic Habits. The book of the month for February is going to be Relentless by Tim Grover. So definitely check that out. And also make sure to sign up for the Recruiting Growth Summit. We're going to have some of the best trainers all together in one place to really help you guys grow your career in 2024. So, time for the podcast. Enjoy it. I'm excited about this episode of the Elite Recruiter podcast. We're going to talk about some deep subjects. We're going to talk about addiction. My guest on this show is going to be sharing his story of how he made it through the other side of addiction. And the crazy thing about this, coming out the other side of addiction, is where he found recruiting and where it's taken his career, his family, and all that stuff. But I have my special guest, Dave Bontempo, with me to share his story and to also talk about some of the struggles and how he made it to the other side of addiction. And I think this is important in the recruiting space because we are high performers. It's a high stress career. And there are a lot of times I've met through my almost 2 decades in the space, recruiters looking for outlets, and those outlets have taken people down some deep, dark holes. And that is why I am excited about this episode of the podcast when it goes live. So, Dave, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. I love the intro, and it's surreal to be here for sure.
So, as you know, we always get started about how'd you get started in the space. And before we go into like the story of how you made it through the addiction, before you even got started in the recruiting space, you were actually around the recruiting world. So talk about that.
Yeah, I remember. Oh my gosh. So my dad has owned, he always says pre-me, and I'm 38. He's owned his own firm, or at least been in the space for 46 years. Started with Dun& Bradstreet in Philadelphia. Went to LaSalle University, got a business degree. And he laughs that when he became a recruiter, he got a phone book and they said, call people that need jobs and call people that want to hire them and figure it out. And so, I mean, I remember, when dad would go on work trips and stuff, like we would go and it was always the Dunhill professional search or recruiting, stuff like that. And like my first, I mean, we were just talking, but my first, I used to clean the office for him, and that would be, make $5 or $10 or something like that. And I never, I mean, I knew what it was, but it was my dad helps people get jobs. That was the way that I would explain it. And in high school and college, I helped manage the temp agency side. So the folks that Craigslist was really big back then, Monster was really big back then. And before, Paychex had or ADP had like an online time card thing, I would have to drive around to the places where we had temps and they would fill out hand time cards, and then I would bring them back. And then my grandpa, who was retired and was working for my dad like 2 days a week, would handwrite checks, and then I would have to drive them back to the people. So it was as bare bones as you can be in the temp agency space from a very, very young age.
So you were literally in high school sitting there like picking up time cards and dropping off checks.
Some summer jobs. And it wasn't, I mean, it was, a small operation. We had a bunch of clients in Northeast Philly, and we would drive around, and, it was technology. Nobody had a phone in their pocket back then where you could scan stuff. So it was like, well, this person had to go to the library to print a time card, or this one couldn't figure out the fax machine. And so, yeah, I mean, it was driving around, always having a pen in the pocket, always having spare time cards because one of the guys at the factory might have forgot his. And yeah, it was interesting. I mean, I didn't realize how much of an impact that made until now, being in it and kind of managing my own firm.
So, and we'll kind of talk about some of maybe the things that you've learned from your dad a little later on.
Yeah.
But so, you went to, your dad owned a recruiting firm. You went to college. You didn't want to touch recruiting after college then, right?
I didn't want to be anything like my dad. I wanted to, I was always, I think, entrepreneurial in a sense. partially because I never wanted to answer to anyone, and partially because it's what I was around. My dad owned his own recruiting firm. My other uncles owned, they bought like a small office and paper supply store in Northeast Philly, and like blew it up is I think a fair word, and ended up getting purchased by Staples, and they always worked for themselves. So I think that was ingrained in high school. I liked music a lot and was never great enough to be in a band, so I started a record label. Tried to help my friends. I would like put on shows and try and help them raise money to go to the studio. In college, I started a clothing company and used to do like fashion shows and all that stuff. Um, so I always wanted to do that, but then the personal demons and struggles kind of took over, and so from like 18 to 26, I was relatively lost and not really sure what to do.
You know, we always hear about like demons and stuff like that. Like, what was that to you?
I mean, I got sober in 2011. I was a very, very bad drug addict, alcoholic. I was an IV heroin user. I was cocaine. I was anything. Some people in the rehab industry say like, a garbage head, where anything to escape normalcy you would put into your body. And that was me, from chewing tobacco to smoking 3 packs of cigarettes a day. And, once physically addicted, it's, it's hard to even like look back at the symmetries, because now I tell people these stories, and I'm a father of three and suburban dad that takes the kids to school in a minivan, and it's hard to encompass the two, but it was ugly for a very, very long time.
So I wasn't anything close to that drug wise, but I did some drugs in high school, and I had a one night that completely changed my life, that I've never touched any of that stuff ever again.
Yeah.
For you, was there a moment where everything changed, or was it just like a gradual like realization?
So I think the debate on this would be, everyone's got their own opinions. I used to get into the battles of like, is addiction a disease? Is it this? Is it that? Like you saying one night that changed your life, I'm guessing that steered you away from it. A guy like me with my pre-genetic composition, a night like that would make me only focus on that. And like it gets to a point where like, I remember people down in the bad neighborhoods in Philly, like when you heard somebody overdosed on a certain, bag of heroin, you weren't afraid to go there. You wanted to go there because you thought that was the best drug out that day. So like there was, I mean, in hindsight, there's never a like, this is okay, now I'm a drug addict. Like you don't know that's happening, but the escape and the normalcy when it goes from a weekend party to when you want to do it the next morning as soon as you wake up, that was where I kind of crossed over. And it was like that for many, many years.
So I know us recruiters are like, or many high performers are always looking for some sort of escape. Was it a quick, gradual crossover from like a weekend thing to like
I've
a
always
mid-weekend?
been I I was an addict. Like I mean, God, I've done so much therapy now, that being sober almost 13 years, working in the field, I still do all that. So like my addictive traits, like I used to tell stories at like schools to kids and like rehabs, where like my therapist would be like, "When's the first time you remember being like hyper addicted to something?" And mine was like when I was 4 or 5 years old, and I would get like an action figure for my birthday. I was never happy with that toy. I always flipped it over to the back and all the other stuff I wanted. I need that. I need that. I need that. I need that. And it goes back that far. Like I like to surf. I think I have like 10 or 11 surfboards. Like you need one, and there's
You
all
need
of these
two.
things. Yeah. Um, so that was always there. And, once you start physically feeling it, and you're kind of, you fight that I'm not as bad as them. I don't do it the way they did it. I only take a pill. I only smoke a joint, whatever it is. You constantly have this differentiating thing. And they always say, like, the longer you use, your I nevers go away, and that was the case with me. Like, well, I'll never try heroin. Well, I tried it. Well, I'll never shoot it. Well, I did that. Well, I'll never steal money from my family. I did that. So, like, all of these things, um, the I nevers go away, and there wasn't much left. And I had pretty much burned every bridge. I had no friends. I really had not much of anything. And through getting sober, I know I gave that stuff away. I didn't lose it to the addiction. I gave it to it.
How did you get sober? How did you finally get there?
I did it is basically my answer to that, because my mom tried a million times. I got DUIs. I crashed cars. I was on house arrest. I overdosed. I overdosed at my grandmom's house and got taken out on the stretcher in front of none of that did it. I used every time after that. The last time that I got clean and have stayed that way, um, there was a little rift with the family over, some money or something, and clearly I was the focal point. Um, but it was the only time that I made the phone call to go to rehab. I sat there with my insurance card and read the number to the person on the other phone. I arranged, obviously, like with insurance, you have a deductible. I didn't have that money, so I arranged the payment plan. Like, my parents didn't do any of that time. I got a ride there, and like, people a lot of times will say, I tried to get sober a million times. Like, they're talking about this, like Matthew Perry, who passed away. Oh, he spent $9 million trying to get sober. Um, the times that I listened to 100% of what I was told, it took one time. The times I tried to cut corners and do 80% or 90 or whatever, that was countless times, because I really wasn't trying. And the time that it worked was the time that I was just sick of being sick.
And like, I want to kind of like ask one like more question kind of towards that. Why that day? Why did you finally get sick of being sick of it?
So many people ask that, like, it's not a movie moment. It's not a scene. It's not, I was walking down the street and I had a vision of, a deceased relative. It was no crazy stuff. It was a regular day. I was sick. I needed what I needed to get better. I couldn't get it. My family kind of made that confrontation. I was nowhere near as bad as I had been in the past. I wasn't, like people say, you have to hit rock bottom. I wasn't at rock bottom. Um, I was just messing up again and was like, I'm either going to die or I'm going to try and get better one more time. And honestly, like, not to be dark and whatever, but like, I don't know that I really cared if I was going to die or not, but I was like, I'm just going to try and go to rehab one more time and see what happens. And it wasn't motivation to go. Like, nobody wants to go to rehab. It wasn't my life's going great, I'm going to go there. I was out of options and I was just so tired that I was like, fine, like, I'll go, I'll get some medicine, I'll physically feel better, and like, we'll see what happens in 3 days. And the 3 days turned into, I stayed at the place I was at for 38, and ever since then just listened to everything that I was told to do.
So 38 days turned into a career
Yeah,
at that
turned
place.
in.
So talk about that next.
Yeah, so fortunately, unfortunately, I think my story, um I I don't mean this to sound boastful or whatever. I think I was blessed with a good brain to where I could kind of coast in school, and through like very bad alcoholism and opiate addiction, I got a bachelor's degree from a 4-year university in business. And like, all these people would be like, "Oh my god, I wish I could go back to school and actually learn," because like, I was sick for 4 years. I didn't do anything. I didn't try. I got C's and everything. I knew if you got a C, you got your credits. Um, and so I went to rehab, and I said to the guy that owned the rehab, who's still a buddy of mine, like, how do I work in this field? How do I encompass the two? And I think the best advice he gave me was like, you need a year sober first before you're immersed in this chaos. Like, I can't do that to you before you have a year sober. So like go home, get a year sober, and he let me volunteer at the place. So every Friday I would drive from Philly to Lancaster and put on these things called like alumni meetings where patients would come back. But like the first year I painted for a guy in AA. I painted like 10, $12 an hour. The dude knew my mom and would tell my mom how much I was getting paid. I mean, I was 26 years old. I mean, I felt like I was five. And it would have been easy to get a chip on my shoulder. Um, but I knew, from guys in the program that like I trained all these people to not believe anything I said. So after a year, I moved to Lancaster, and one of my closest friends' mothers, God bless her, let me live in the apartment above their garage, rent free, to get back on my feet. So my buddy and I got sober together and got jobs at the rehab that we went to together, and both of us are still sober.
Uh, that's incredible. And so you spent a few years actually working in these facilities, right?
Many, yeah, I think I would say like 7 or 8 years. Um, I started on site doing what they call aftercare coordinator, which is like if you were a patient and you were leaving and you were going back to Philly, the therapist would tell me, like, Dave, he needs a place to live. He needs a doctor for this, a therapist for that. And I would go find all that and kind of match it up and kind of like an appointment setter. And I met a lot of people that way. I think I have the kind of sales type A personality. So people were like, in the addiction space, there's a thing called outreach business development, which is, it's essentially like sales where you're advocating for your facility and you go to, conferences and do presentations. So I did that, and rose the rank from like rep to director. And I was chief marketing officer at a couple places, and, helped open some places and stuff like that. And so kind of rose those ranks for probably, like I said, 7 or 8 years.
And then from there, being a chief marketing officer, opening up facilities, impacting people's lives, impacting the people's lives that were you were a few years ago.
Sure.
When did that flip into recruiting happen, and how did that happen?
It happened. So the more that I put time together sobriety wise, the more friends I had that opened their own businesses, which were rehabs, or the more my friends got promoted or, got moved into C-suite roles, and staffing was always an issue. And it was, I don't even know if it was my idea at first. I feel like my one friend Justin, it was his, of like, isn't your dad a recruiter? Like, can he help us find nurses? Because we can't find anybody and whatever. And so in the beginning, I started farming jobs to my dad because I still worked for a center. We're a single income family. My mind wasn't ready to take a jump, but it was like, Dad, this guy needs this. I would kind of teach him the jargon and the acronyms and stuff like that. And he would go do a search. And like, after a couple years, he was like, Dave, like, not that this isn't my area of interest, but like, you should be doing this full time. Like, it is such a huge industry. It's blowing up. I can't even keep up with it. I don't even know what the hell you're talking about when you're on the phone with these people negotiating stuff. And not to mention, like, you're trying to do most of the work. Like, and so he was the one that kind of really shed the light on the fact that, like, if you can do this for 5 hours a week and help connecting these people, like, what do you think you could do when you're doing it full time?
And how did you, or when did you actually make that jump? Because a lot of people like talk about this. They talk
I,
about oh yeah, like you could do it full time, like you're doing this. What made that
I,
jump?
I like, I made the forced jump, like where they say like God's doing for you what you can't do for yourself. Um, I was still so afraid. And so my first venture, I started a recruiting firm with a couple partners that had no knowledge or training in recruiting, did good work in behavioral health. I think we all learned tremendously from it, but I think it was a safety net for me where, like, I wanted somebody to put up money so I would have a base salary because God forbid and this and that. And like my dad's buddy's been recruiters for like 40 years. Like, bro, if you want a base salary, you ain't a recruiter. Like, you're not even a sales rep. And we, I think we learned a lot. I think there was definitely um some animosity towards the end, and those guys that we kind of decided to split ways. They had a vision for kind of like a boiler room, big office with a bunch of young guys, and hey, we're gonna get the phones pounded. And this was like right after COVID, where like I'm like, bro, I've been recruiting for like 2-3 years now. Like in the last year, I haven't heard one person that wants to be on site. So like I don't know where we're getting 40 kids to be in this boiler room making 30 grand a year. So we just had different views. And I think, I got to a point where anxiety, even in sobriety, and depression are still like a big part of my story. And my values, like they were looking at big offices in Philly, which is like 45 minutes from my house. And I was like, I really think I can do this from my home and set it up with no overhead and have some 1099 contractors and work what I want to work and be picky with it and take a shot. And I did that. Um and I've been on my own 100% for 2 years now. I just finished my second year.
Congrats on that. That's awesome.
Thank you. By no means was that easy for the people that are listening to this. There are thousands of dollars of therapy bills and a list of a million people telling me, I told you to do this 10 years ago. So by no means was it easy, or was I as confident as I may appear right now. I was a wreck for a long time.
So when it comes to like this world, like how are you different than most of the other recruiters out there in the behavioral world? Which I feel like part of this is the story that we just talked about, but is there any other differentiators that you believe is making a difference for you?
Yeah, I think there's three. I think one, my personal vocation to recovery makes me really want to work with good facilities and put good people in them so the patients are getting the best care. I think the second is that my professional career in behavioral health, I always say to people, I've either done, supervised, or collaborated with whatever job you're hiring me for. I just placed a COO at $1 billion real estate company who is starting a behavioral health company. And that guy was a colleague of mine, called him up, one candidate, and placed them. And so like I have that kind of a knack. And then I think there's a lot of folks that, recruiting, um, it's I don't want to say like the next buzzword, like it's been around forever and I'm still a new kid on the block, but there's a lot of folks that are in the addiction space or whatever, who are trying to start these firms. And I think my leg up is I was like born into it. Like I knew what recruiting was when most people didn't. And I think that really learning that and having, my dad lives 15 minutes away. Every time he comes and drops my kids off or whatever, there's some old Dunhill packet or something where he's like, read this. And like my first ego is like, that's from 1981. But I read that stuff now. And I think not everyone has that understanding of the business. So I think that gives me a tremendous leg up.
Where do you see the behavioral health recruiting world going over the next few years?
I think it's such a loaded question. I think first you would have to answer, where do I see behavioral health going? I think there's always going to be bad players who exploit insurance and get, a bad name for the whole industry. Autism's going through it now, where you think like we're helping kiddos and children and stuff, and there's people that are going into the ABA space that are exploiting it for that. I think as long as, you know there's so many ways that I don't think you have, well, this would regulate it or that would. I think a lot of the smaller companies are going to get bought by a lot of the bigger groups. I think insurance companies have already started, but are going to start trying to buy their own centers like they do with hospitals to basically trade the money back and forth. Um, but I think, as long as the problems aren't going anywhere. I think they're going to get worse and get younger. Adolescent treatment is very, very big now. Um, Licensed clinicians and nurses, you can't treat patients without them. So I think there's always constantly going to be a need for it. And I think, it's only going to get bigger and busier, truthfully.
I know there's a lot of listeners that are in the healthcare space, and you don't have to make this advice like specifically for behavioral health, but is there any like good business development tips that you would say that are working in 2024 when it comes to getting new clients in the healthcare world?
I'm very blessed, and by no means is it to sound brash or egotistical. I've been very fortunate that I don't do much cold BD because the addiction and mental health space is so small. Like, people joke around with me, and I take it after my dad that like I know people everywhere, and I've helped, I don't want to say run the facility, but run the outreach initiative from Philadelphia, from places in Pittsburgh, North Jersey, Beverly Hills, West Palm Beach, New Jersey. So, like, I know people everywhere. And I think the real lesson, hopefully, younger in my career, I probably had an ego and thought, certain stuff about myself. But hopefully, I think the way that you carry yourself and treat people is the most important, because I'll get calls where they're like, I got a call 2 weeks ago on a Sunday morning where some guy was like, "Hey, I was in synagogue yesterday, and this guy in Lakewood told me that you could." I had no idea who he was talking about, but I was kind to somebody on the phone who was starting a rehab, and it got me another contract. So I think, you know, my advice when I was supervising like sales reps and they would cold call a business, either on the phone or in person, is flip the script. And if you left what you left or said what you said on the voicemail and you got that message, would you call you back? Because Monday morning, this therapist has 45 voicemails. And if you're just, "Hi, I'm Dave Bontempo. I saw you had a need for a clinician. Give me a call back," you're not standing out. And she's just hitting delete, just like you are when, if you're not looking for weed control or a pool guy and that dude leaves you a message, you delete it before he's finished talking. So I think really focusing on what am I putting out there and what I call me back was one of the best lessons I ever learned.
Awesome. Now, I know you like I want to say like the you chose a space, but the space chose you.
Yeah.
And because of that, you understand the niche very well. There's a lot of recruiters that we like. I mean, I started off in construction management, headhunting as my first recruiting job. I have a passion for GovCon, DoD, IC, which that's where I'm at now. And
Yep.
I had to spend years working to get there. What would you advice would you give to recruiters when you're talking about finding a niche that works for them?
I mean, the way that I decided to do this was like I was burnt out and wanted to leave the addiction space. I didn't like some of the competitive aspects that were going on and thought that some of it was becoming more about, the bottom line as opposed to patient care. And like my dad said to me, you put 9 years into this space, instead of just walking away and reinventing yourself at like 36, find a product or a service that all of your competitors need and create it. And that's what I did. So I think people that are just starting out, like recruiting, you know, anything can be your niche. But like if you're coming from somewhere where it's like, "Hey, I'm burned out. I want to like look into this or whatever." Like think about the field you came from. And like chances are recruiting in it is prominent. Like you mentioned construction. There's like healthcare has 9 million different kinds of it. The trades, like there's a way to find that. And now more than ever, people, you go into any restaurant and it's all like, "We weren't open yesterday because we can't find people to work. We can't find people to work." And it's like people have a lot of options now. So figuring out a way to, you know, use what you've built and all the talent and all the skill set you have. Maybe you've already been in that niche and kind of like it found me, you can just turn around and go, "Well, I was an IT engineer for 20 years. Maybe I could place those guys all over because I know what they want from a job offer. I know what they're looking at. I know all the softwares, yada, yada." And that's kind of the way I did it.
Awesome. And you said you got that advice at the age of 36.
Yeah. 36. I was, I was tired. I was burned out. I had made a nice living, and not to scoff at that, but the paycheck, like people say, you're only happy with a raise for like 2 to 3 months, and then you get used to it. Like that was very true, and um, I definitely was like, maybe I could be a medical device sales rep, or maybe I could be that. And I just remember my dad going like, dude, your LinkedIn network, he said to me, every friend I've met of yours in the past 8 years, you tell me what rehab they work for. Like everyone. So like you're gonna walk away from all that. You're gonna be a nobody in some other field. Like figure out a service for all these guys that own all these centers that they can pay you. And I was just like, it's not a bad idea.
Is your dad still like, does he help out with the firm at all? With your
Yeah,
firm now?
it's funny. Like we're I think very good as colleagues that operate separately. Um, just he lives 10 minutes away. We talk all the time. Um, he has his way of doing things. I have mine. I'm kind of, I think, shot out of a cannon a little bit. I think he always like looks at me and just is like, the things that I've been able to do over the past couple of years. He just kind of laughs and shakes his head, and I always say to him, it's not lost on me. Like I don't feel like, luck's been on my side, and I think a lot of that is what he's taught me. I don't feel like, I've arrived, or I had this great like, billing year last year, so whatever, like it could turn tomorrow. And he's very good at keeping it very green for me, and letting me know, while I've had a good run thus far, I'm still a new kid on the block.
What do you think has been one of the biggest lessons that you've learned from him, old school wise, in this new school world?
Not to like, don't cut a corner for a quick fee. I think I definitely haven't talked more people out of not taking jobs I was sourcing for, but I would say a fair amount of folks, friends included, I'm like, definitely I try to highlight the good of what they have and where they're at, because I think a lot of recruiters, not a lot, I think some recruiters can come off in that slimy car salesman where it's like, oh my God, you're not happy, you're not this. Well, we can do that. Well, we can do that. And like I always say to people, like, first of all, I don't talk to candidates on Friday afternoons anymore. Like I tell them all, like, if you're in recovery, don't go to happy hour. But if you're not in recovery, go to happy hour, blow off steam, tell your significant other you hate your boss. If by Tuesday you still want to leave, call me. But like usually it's just that. So I think um, really respecting candidates and employers, but candidates to not try and get that quick fix to force them into something that's not right for them long term. Those folks, one, they'll come back to you later. Um, and two, some of my best clients are people that I talked into staying at jobs that then were like, hey, I just got promoted to CFO and we need 8 positions. So can you recruit? That's the most important thing.
That's awesome. Is there anything else about your story that you'd love to share and talk about before we go into the next phase of the podcast?
I think it's never too late to do anything. It's never too late to get sober. It's never too late to jump out on your own. Um, it'll happen when it's supposed to. I look back and, maybe wish that I started and had the guts to jump out on my own sooner, but I learned a lot of lessons, some good, some bad. I worked for some guys that taught me how I should treat people. I worked for some guys where I said I would never treat people that way. Um, so I think, giving it up to the universe and whatever you believe in, and truly just manifesting what you want to see in your life is, I've bought into that, and I've seen the benefits from it for sure. So I think, whether you're 60 and you can't put a bottle down, or you're 50 and you really want to try this little idea that's been keeping you up at night, I think you're never too old to take a shot.
Nice. All right, ready for the quickfire questions.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to a brand new recruiter that's actually just getting started in this industry?
I think the same thing that I just kind of said, treat every person like they're the only candidate or employer that you're dealing with. I think a lot of times when I used to run sales teams at the rehabs, the owners would be like, I want them making 40 calls a day. And like you put a kid who, like, especially the newer generation, like they don't even know how to speak on the phone, let alone make 40 calls a day. if they're looking at that, they're only looking at the number of a quota they have to hit. So I think instead making really meaningful um, impact on people and wanting to be remembered for like patience and listening and kindness and, you know, hey, like I know you said you weren't feeling great last time we talked. Like, how are you? Like, I had a woman last night who starting a job on Monday. Um, she was texting me waiting for her background to come back last night. Her 14-year-old son had a basketball game yesterday. So like today, she's in LA. After this, I'm gonna, hey, how'd your son do last night? How many points did he score? And really, that attention to detail, I think, will make you remembered from the others that just kind of are churning and burning.
Same question, but for experienced recruiters. What advice would you give to them to keep on seeing success?
God, I don't want to sound like I'm giving advice to people more successful and with more time in than me. Um, I think the one thing that like in some of the Facebook groups and stuff like that that you and I are in, I see people freaking out about AI or the industry's changing or everything's tanking. And I forget if it was you or somebody, but like they shared like, how many billions of dollars was spent on recruiting and no matter how old you get, I think with recruiting or anything, um, it's kind of like the analogy of like if you think you can or you think you can't, like either way you're right. Like focusing on that negative, like is AI going to be able to place 60 factory workers in a certain area, blah blah blah? Yes. Is AI going to come in and place this niche CFO for this super specific cancer research thing and yada yada? Like no, that's you, and you need to remember that you put all this time in and you've built that. There's always going to be someone trying to take something away from you. To their experience, like real experienced people, they probably felt like Career Builder was going to end recruiting or Monster was going to end recruiting or the internet. And like, I think, people seldom realize how valuable they are. And I think stopping and looking at that, like you've been through storms before, and that's where guys like me can look at the industry and go, oh, I can make it through that. I'm not as scared as Chat GBT and stuff like that because my dad used to do this with the white pages.
I got two more questions, a little deviation, and they're going to be deep.
Sure.
For somebody going through depression
Mm.
right now, what advice would you give to them?
My advice to them, if I had said some like rah rah, biblical verse or whatever, I don't think it would resonate with those people. I think my advice would be if your best friend was going through what you're going through now, what would you tell them to make them see through for another day or to make them feel valued, and then listen to that advice? Because that, I think those two things, one, it shows them they're not as far gone as they may have thought. Um, and it's really annoying because all people usually are good people. So like if I had said to you, like, what if like you were super depressed and I was like, what advice would you give if this was 20 years from now and your kid was going through this? And they do this like eloquent thing. You're like, well, that's what you should tell yourself. And you get pissed, but then you realize that's inside you. So I think that was the lesson for me was like people could say all the time, God is good. God doesn't leave us, take us from troubled waters to let us drown on dry land, and a million quotes. And that shit never resonated. But if it was like, hey man, what if your best friend was going through something really, really bad right now? What would you say to them? And then when you voice that and you say, that's what you should be telling yourself, that's really powerful because that's a message from within. And that's where I think you have to reach to get through anything.
Same question, but for addiction. What would you tell somebody that's struggling with an addiction?
I think the most blunt thing that I can say is although almost 13 years sober and dad and yada yada, I'm still a self-centered dude. And if getting loaded was better than being sober, I'd still be getting loaded. Um, I think the first year is so freaking hard. It's embarrassing. You can't go anywhere without wondering who knows what. And I remember I remember when I was thinking about leaving the one company that I was working at, it's similar to addiction, but I was afraid these guys were going to call me a job hopper and yada yada. And like somebody said to me, like, you think any of them cats are going to be at your funeral? Do you think any of them guys really care any much about you more than like to just say whatever? So I think like really just focusing on, it sounds so cliche, but like a day at a time, an hour at a time. Um, you weren't put on this earth to suffer in the capacity that you probably are, and you're worth getting better. And the analogy that got me was like if you're in the grips of addiction, um, chances are you're physically sick, chances are you're mentally sick, chances are you're financially broke, chances are everyone is upset with you and you're fighting to continue living that way. Like you're gripping that like it's a teddy bear and you're a child. And the thought is like, why are you holding on to that? And the reason is because you can't see a brighter tomorrow. And an old counselor buddy of mine, Ben, said to me, change only happens when the pain of holding on is greater than a fear of letting go. And I would say let go and give it a shot.
Mm. It's hard to switch into it back to the normal recruiting questions. So sorry, listeners.
We'll do it. We'll do a 2-part series.
What do you think has been a book that has had a huge impact on your career?
The Presentation Secrets of Steve Jobs. It
Hmm.
was basically like the mantra is like Steve Jobs, like they basically make it like this: tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them, then tell them what you just told them. And it basically is like what you do with the podcast, but you encompass like it's just a way to get your message across. I used to do it with the drug and alcohol treatment centers. Now I do it when I'm calling a candidate. Like here's I always say to a candidate, like my first call is super short. And as you can tell, I talk fast and all that. Hey, I'm going to tell you where the job is. I'm going to tell you how much it pays. I'm going to tell you the schedule if it's a nurse thing or whatever. And then I'm going to send you the job description and I'm going to send you the website. And you tell me if you want to be a part of that. I'm not going to get into in the first conversation, what's your biggest strength? What's your biggest weakness? Where do you, because the company's going to ask all that stuff. So I basically screen them out and do that. And I think that's where like they feel comfortable. You basically rehearse what you're talking about. You end with that, and there's no kind of secrets. And I know that there's some people that my dad. Funny, we butt heads. Never wants to put salary in an ad. And I say to him, like I said to my sales reps with people leaving a voicemail, are you going to click on that? If you don't know how much it pays and you're gainfully employed and you're relatively happy, do you have to go down that rabbit hole? The people that are clicking on those, in my opinion, and I'm not 100% right, but the people that are willing to click on a job application that don't know how much it pays or where it's at or what the hours are somebody that's probably not the best for the job because they're probably unemployed or on the market or whatever. And the guy that you want, like that dude, you need to know how much the 401k match is, how much the PTO time is, all that stuff. And then once you get through that, then you see if company culture and all that stuff matches up. But company culture and all that means nothing if it's not going to pay the guy right and do that. So I think that's where I learned that from that book.
Do you have like a favorite tech tool at the moment? Rec tech tool.
I'm like so old. I like literally have been trying to make sure that my headphones and stuff for this, and I'm not even wearing them. The microphone worked for like 10 hours. So like tech wise, not I mean, I started using, I do a fair amount of work with startups. And so I started using Chat GPT to help them with job descriptions because I'm a sales guy. Like I have ADD. I can't complete a sentence. So when people ask me to do like a business plan or whatever, it's not my strong suit. Um, but stuff like that has helped when like we'll be doing, I'm working with a couple right now where it's like, hey, we need like these 3 C-suite positions and it's going to be in this area. And I'll counsel folks, and I think that's one of the legs up for my experience is like, well, let's do this generic job description and then we can figure out what it is. But that certainly helped me. and my applicant tracking, I use Crelate and I love it. It's super simple. It's super basic. It's probably not the best for everybody. Um, it does what I need it to do. My brother-in-law is a teacher by day and a headhunter by night. He 1099s for me and kills it. He's got a seat. He's got a LinkedIn premium account, and that's kind of what we do. I spend most of my day on LinkedIn.
Awesome. What do you think has been one of the biggest contributors to your success?
My wife, I think, has like whenever I get manic about work or this, that, like my wife's so even keeled and it drives me nuts, to a sense. And then she always says, like, I trust you, I know it's gonna be fine. If I have a candidate that leaves abruptly and doesn't tell me during the replacement period and like, oh my God, like, I got to do this replacement and all, I have a nervous breakdown. Um, and like, she'll always say to me, like, dude, if you really like believe all that manifesting stuff that like you talk about, that person wasn't right for the job and the other one is. And like, I've been like, really into Wayne Dyer and stuff lately. And that's very much like there is no good and bad. It just is what it is. And for a control freak type A guy like me, that's hard. But I think seeing the silent support from my family has been a big help. Like I remember when I switched jobs, I took a pay cut um, when my wife was pregnant and we were living with my in-laws because I saw a future at this other company that I didn't see. And I asked my in-laws, like, are you okay? Kelly's 6 months pregnant right now. I'm going to change jobs. I'm going to make less money. We're still living in your house rent free. And like they trusted me to do it. And I think that's what I need to remember because I sometimes doubt myself, but the people around me, um, they either don't or they haven't shown me that they do so far.
And here, the next question I'm going to ask like two different ways. Everything you've gone through now, if you can go back and have a cup of coffee with yourself at the beginning of your recruiting career.
Yeah.
So, few years ago, what advice would you tell yourself on how to like in the recruiting world?
It's going to get worse before it gets better. Um, I don't know that I would want to share anything with I don't know that I would want to share anything with early recruiter me. I don't know that I would want to share anything with early recovery me. I don't know that I would want to share anything with active addict Dave because I feel like every single thing that I went through um is how I'm here right now. And so like could I give advice and stuff like that? Yeah, but like sitting in that pain of like, is this candidate going to take the job? Oh, damn, the client sent the offer letter to the candidate Friday at 5 o'clock when I asked them not to. And sitting in all that insanity, I think has equipped me to deal with some stuff. So I think I would like early recruiter me to go through all the hell and all the craziness because I think there's beauty in scars.
Well, and I was going to ask the same question for you. We'll just say you coming straight out of college with everything that you've gone, but you think it'd be best for you
I
to.
think the one thing I would tell the person, like man, I've lost a lot of friends. One of my closest friends passed away about 6 months ago. He just could not get sober, and I think the one thing that I would tell, like seeing now, and my wife and my kids and the life that we've built together. The one thing that I would tell, you know, active addiction me is like, it's gonna be okay if you don't give up, and then I would just leave it at that because I think that's powerful and the story is still left to be written. But I think the assuring that like not only is it going to be okay, it's going to be pretty damn good. Um, but you got to do a tremendous amount of work, and I think too many people try to get by without that work, or try to cut corners, and it just never works. It never works. The long road is the stable one, and I never I've never met anyone that put in the work that said, I wish I didn't have to. Just like I never met anyone that went to rehab that said, I found out I didn't need to be there. It's like, if you're in rehab, you need to be there. So I think, taking the long road and not trying to cut corners. There's true beauty in that for sure.
Awesome. And before we wrap up, is there anything else that you would love to share with the listeners?
Um, I think I am very blessed to have had good teachers in my work life and in my personal life, and I think that if people told me from a very early point in my career, you'll never work harder than when you're working for yourself. And I believed it, but God, I was so scared, and I was always this like, you know, I was always a worst case scenario thinker, and I think I spent a lot of time worrying about these things that would never happen. And the therapist said to me one time, like, you're worried about what play you're going to run in the fourth quarter and the game hasn't even started. So like, yeah, like, could I like go out on my own? Could this year I bill zero? Could this year everything, like, anything can happen? And um I think for me, I am glad that I finally got to a point with a lot of others' encouragement that it was like the worst thing that can happen if you try and it doesn't work out is just that. And I think the real sin would be like if you don't try and you look back and go, damn, I should have bet on myself. You're never going to regret betting on yourself. That would be my
Mm,
advice that it took me 38 years to learn.
that's powerful. Now, if somebody actually wants to follow you or get in touch with you, what's the best way?
My LinkedIn is Dave Bontempo. It's a picture of me like this with a hat on. Azuri Talent Partners is the website, which has my contact info on it. My email address is Dave at Azuri Talent Partners. Um, Facebook, whatever. It's funny. I was just talking to somebody. We are doing a search for a very difficult position that we've had 3 people sign and magically vanish for. And I said to this woman, I'm looking people up on Instagram, on Facebook, and I'm saying, I apologize if I'm invading your personal space, but I need to talk to you about a job. So, however, anybody would want to reach out to me is great, but they're the easiest, quickest ways.
And as always, I normally have somebody's LinkedIn profile in the show notes, so I'll make
Yep.
sure to have that in the show notes.
Yeah, and,
Well,
and the one
Dave,
thing I would say too, recruiting wise, I certainly appreciate that. I'm definitely still a new kid on the block, but if anybody is on or listening to this and needs advice for themselves or for a family member, it's 100% confidential. No one will ever know. But if you want to just reach out to me and ask me to help navigate or just some advice, that is completely, I'm happy to do so.
awesome. Well, thank you, Dave. Definitely thank you for that. And thank you for this conversation. Like it's I've known a lot of people in the recruiting space where they've gone down the vices have just taken over. And I know most of the time, like this podcast is like, sunshine and rainbows, but this is an important conversation that I know that somebody out there is dealing with or struggling with, or has a family member that's struggling with in
Yeah.
2024. So I'm so grateful for your time to come and share, Dave. So
Yeah,
thank you.
it means a lot. I sent my dad a picture of the podcast and told him I was going to be a guest on this, and I know he was proud, and to be welcomed into the recruiting community and still have a lot to learn, but feel like I'm working hard and hopefully earning my stripes is really cool. So to be a guest on something like this is not lost on me how fortunate I am. So I appreciate you having me.
Oh, well, thank you, Dave. And for the listeners, let's crush 2024. Let's all grow together. And thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.